All right, here we go with episode 93 of Return to Authenticity. And this week's guest, Cheri Mason. This conversation was really fun. It was, Cheri can be described as someone with this tenacious leadership spirit, just a real tenacious style and a tenacious story of perseverance. And she also has this massive heart for helping others. To summarize a bit of the show, Cheri became the first woman and the spouse of a military veteran who she became the chairman of the Board of Veterans Appeals at the Department of Veterans Affairs. So basically, this is the department that's helping veterans get the benefits that they deserve. And often, our military veterans do a poor job of getting the benefits they deserve because they're really taught to overcome throughout their career. If they talk about physical or mental challenges they're having, they can get taken out of a pipeline of work or operational activity. And so they tend to just bury that. And then when they retire, they've buried this for so long. Now they've got to recreate and actually reveal what they really need help with, and so that they can get the benefits that they require. And often they don't even know the steps to follow. They don't do it. And so they're dealing with debilitating physical and mental challenges without the support of the community that's there to support them. So Cheri's role was really to reach into that community, make sure they knew how to navigate, and make sure they knew how to get the benefits that they required. She has a very unique perspective because she is not only the spouse of a military veteran and so saw from the front row kind of what our veterans go through. She also, from a family perspective, was a multiple suicide loss survivor. She had multiple suicides in her own family that she came through. And so she understood and understands the perspective of a family member, and certainly saw that firsthand, what that's all about. So a very unique perspective. And she just has this massive heart for helping others and helping our veterans. And so a fantastic show, great conversation. And I think you're going to really love hearing from this week's guest, Cheri Mason. Welcome to the Return to Authenticity podcast, where we hear inspiring and courageous stories of people who made bold pivots in their lives toward their more authentic selves, that version of themselves they were born to be, or they had to find after life threw them a major curveball. I'm your host, Eric Sardina. Welcome and stand by. Welcome to the show, everyone. Today's guest is the Honorable Cheri Mason. Cheri began her life in the picturesque foothills of Appalachia in Portsmouth, Ohio. She learned from a young age that life presents us with opportunities to overcome obstacles and leave a lasting imprint on others. Cheri went on to receive her bachelor's degree in political science from Ohio Northern and her law degree from Creighton University. Later, Cheri used her tenacious spirit to defy the odds to become the first woman and military spouse chairman of the Board of Veterans Appeals at the Department of Veterans Affairs, where she transformed a struggling organization into a high-functioning organization by putting her people first and empowering them to implement innovation and deliver record-breaking results to veterans and their families. In her upcoming book, Dare to Relate, Leading with a Fierce Heart, she unveils how her journey as a multiple suicide loss survivor and a military spouse uniquely empowered her to embrace her unconventional leadership. I'm excited to have Cheri on the show today to share her unique approach to leadership with fierce perseverance and a caring heart, and how she actively supports the veteran and military communities on subjects such as leadership, transition, and suicide awareness. And with that, Cheri Mason, welcome to the show.
Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
It's a pleasure. And we're almost to the new year. So happy early New Year's to you. So 2024 right around the corner.
Yep. Right around the corner. Lots of good things coming our way.
Yeah. I can't wait to chop it up a bit and talk about your background, and then also get to all the good stuff that you're doing in the veteran community and your upcoming book, and so many areas to kind of dig into. So I'm looking forward to that. Thanks for spending some time with us today.
Thank you.
And so, with that, let's talk about growing up, what it was like for you, what your family situation was, where you were, all those good things.
So as you noted, I grew up in Portsmouth, Ohio, which is in the foothills of Appalachia. And, it was yeah, it was beautiful. It's a beautiful part of the country, absolutely gorgeous, but hard. Um, the Appalachian spirit is a strong one.
Yes.
But mine had some unique challenges. My parents, my father served during World War II, in the Pacific, and
Mm,
my mother um, had not yet met him, but she had her own challenges growing up from losing both of her parents before she was 10, and then really being, she was the tail end Charlie. She ended up being a Rosie the Riveter type, putting oxygen lines in airplanes at Wright Field at the age of
mm,
16.
wow.
And so, as World War II came to a close, my father came home, my mother returned, finished high school, and they met. And shortly after that, they got married. And this was like 1947. My brother came along about 2 years later. And then 16 years later, I came
Oh, wow.
along.
Right on.
And so but over that time, my father had begun struggling with mental health issues.
Mm,
And looking back, now that I've seen his military record and know more as an adult, he was suffering from adult onset paranoid schizophrenia.
mm.
And part of it was probably brought on by the stress of serving on a cargo attack ship in the Pacific. He was the radio operator, so I can only imagine the messages he took. Um,
So, a
so
cargo attack ship, do you know what a cargo attack ship is? I'm not familiar with
I
that.
had to look it up. I'd never heard of it. So a cargo attack ship is one that sometimes ferries people, sometimes ferries cargo, but they also have guns and they also are prepared to attack as necessary.
Oh,
It's not their primary, but it's part of their job.
yeah.
There were a few of them running around the Pacific, so as part of the overall fleets, they'd kind of come along. Um,
Yeah. And the
so
Pacific, the Pacific, knowing a bit about World War II, but not the depth. I think that perhaps a lot of, historians that really love to dig into it. I've watched and certainly familiar with a lot of the big battles and the European theater. And I don't know if the Pacific theater gets less attention or if it's just had less Hollywood attention or what it is. But the Pacific theater was, from my limited knowledge, brutal, like a
it was
truly
brutal.
brutal theater of
Yeah.
war.
It was brutal, and he was 44 to 46. Yeah, so he
Yeah.
was there, he was serving in the heat of it.
Yeah.
And so it was, I can't imagine, but it was brutal.
Yeah.
So, and he was out. I mean, he didn't come home. I mean, he was like, same with the European theater, they
Right.
didn't come home, right?
Right. They had these
So
very long deployments, right? It wasn't not that 6 months or a year isn't long, because 6 months or a year deployment
right.
is long, but these guys went
So
and you come
two and
home when
three
it's
years.
over, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's exactly what it was. So yeah, so we really it wasn't, apparently, from what my mother and other family members told me. He started really exhibiting problems in the 50s. Um, and initially was received treatment through electric shock, which was what they
Mm.
used at the time. And then they took him off that sometime in the mid 60s, about the time I was born, from what I can tell, and put him on meds. The meds didn't work well for him, and he really struggled, and he died by suicide when I was 4.
So sorry, man. Brutal.
And yes, I mean, my life changed overnight. My brother was actually at boot camp when my father died, and he was already married and expecting his first child.
Mm.
And it was just, it created a different dynamic, completely, because people who had been friends, my parents' friends, no longer recognize us. They would literally turn around on the street because they didn't know what to say. They didn't know
Right.
what to do, and mental health and suicide were very much not understood at the time, and people. just were afraid. They didn't know, right? They were uncomfortable. They didn't know. I call it. A friend of mine has written about this, and she calls it. Her name's Jen Marr. She calls it the awkward zone, where people just don't know what to say. But in Appalachia, it's even almost compounded because Appalachian nature is change is not is not a good thing.
Right.
We don't like that, and so we were different, and people really wanted us to fade into the background.
Mm.
Well, with a mother like I had, that was not happening. She was the government teacher at the local city school. She was well known in the community, as my father had been. And so it was, she was not going to let us become invisible, although people tried to make that. And so I was comfortable just hiding, because I understood that I made people uncomfortable just by being there, and she would not allow it. And so that's kind of what I grew up with. I mean, people, it was like a shadow always went before me. People knew who I was, or they knew the story,
Mm.
before I even got them. I mean, I went to the same school with the same 70 some people, so that was okay. But when you're dating in different areas of the community, I mean, everybody I dated knew the story before
Wow.
they dated. And it was just, and people, their expectations were like, oh, don't worry. You've had a rough time. You'll be okay. Just, the expectations were that you weren't going to be successful, that you were going to, I mean, quite frankly, in my hometown, the expectations that you were going to be pregnant at the age of 16 when that kind of situation
Yeah.
was I mean, and people literally, I mean, family members said that to me. And, my
And
mother said, I will hurt you.
yeah.
That happens. She said, you won't worry about anything else. I will hurt you.
And
Um,
was that expectation, you think, because you didn't have a father in the home anymore, or was it that you had suffered this
yes,
trauma, and so they figured
I,
you
I
were going to
think
kind of be impacted and go off the rails a bit, or?
both. At that time my father died in 1969. It was the early
Mm.
70s. Single woman, driven families were not common, and
Hmm.
especially not, in Appalachia,
Right.
in
Right.
that area. And so, yes, that was part of it. The other part was the trauma that, oh, you were not going to be, you had a hard life. So,
Yeah.
it's okay if, you can't do anything because you're basically, again, it's part of that invisibility viewpoint. You're supposed to sit in the corner and just take life as it comes. And
Mm.
excuse me, with my mother, who was, I refer to her as she was the original badass. She was not going to allow that to happen to us, and specifically not to me,
Yeah.
um, because she understood the impact that invisibility would have, on us. Um, but also, she said, "You can do and be whoever you want to be," and I believed her because she certainly had done what she
Right.
wanted to do through the various challenges. I mean, she became a widow at the age of 42.
At the
Um,
age of 22, 42,
42,
42.
42.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so, I
So,
mean, you really grew up with this, so with a very strong mother influence and this, and really living in tension and living in having to deal with tension and how people were interacting with you in a very, uncomfortable way. You had to learn how to manage through that. It sounds like.
yes, yes, yes. And that taught me more than I realized, actually, because what really taught me a lot was the veteran community. So, because my father had served, um, and we had many friends and a couple of family members who had served. It was the veteran community who really came alongside and supported us. So if something broke or we need something fixed, it was that community who came alongside, regardless. They hadn't served with my father, but they knew him, right? And I say that probably spent too many Friday nights in the American Legion.
Yeah. Right.
We had friends who lived nearby, and that was a good social community for my mother to have. And and that it was that community, but it was that community that supported and took care of us, and encouraged us. And so that that told me a lot. And then at the age of 17, just as I was preparing to leave for college, my brother, who at that time was 34 years old, died by suicide.
Oh my word. Oh wow. Man.
He left two children. He left two children, 13 and 9, boy and a girl. He had started struggling with mental health issues a couple of years prior to um, to his death. Now although he was in boot camp when my father died, because my father died, he transitioned to the National Guard.
Mm.
And so he did, for a long time, he did weekend service things. So he didn't really, he served, but it was different than what my father served.
Yeah.
Um, my brother, started having challenges, and he did not tell his treating doctor the family history.
Mm.
And the treating doctor, because of because of doctor patient privilege, would not talk to anybody in the family. And the doctor did not know that my father died by suicide. And so, until after my brother died.
Mm.
And that makes a difference, because what studies have shown us and science has shown us, that when you have one suicide, the risk for family members goes up very quickly,
Mm.
and it's high. Um, my risk for suicide is high, and my children, who never knew their grandfather or their uncle, they also have high risk, because we have suicide in the family. And so it's those type of things that people don't quite understand. And so I really struggled. I was supposed to leave for college, which was a couple hours away from home. And I was like, I can't leave. And my mother and my sister-in-law said, no, you're going to college, because if you don't go, you won't.
Mm.
And they were right. So I went, and, that opened up a whole new world. But it was still, that shadow was still there. Now, my brother died in 1982, and the world was understanding more, but still not where it needed to be. But the community that he lived in was much more supportive, and they really gathered around my sister and my niece and nephew and supported them. My mother supported them. Um, and so it was a little different than what my mother and I had gone through, 13 years before, and
Yeah.
throughout the life we had. But it was still hard, because you're trying to figure out, one, how this happened, the impact to you. You're a college student. You're not even 18, and you're by yourself on a college campus.
Right.
I went to a small university, and that helped. And it was very much a community. My mom had let the president and the chaplain know, and so they routinely checked on me and engaged with me to make sure I was doing okay, and several other people, knew. So it was a challenge, but it taught me a lot, because I learned where, that people will let you become invisible,
Mm.
if if you want to, or they will try to make you invisible. And my mother, who I tried to hide behind for a long time, finally said to me when I was about 12 years old, you need to stand on your own 2 feet. You need to be who you are. You can't be Doris's daughter for the rest of your life.
Mm.
And so, that's what happened. That's
Yeah.
my childhood.
So would you say that you had an awareness of in the moment, or was it more on reflection around this idea that when you overcome adversity, you have this opportunity for growth, or this, you can grow and you can impact people in a different way when you've suffered and come through something difficult on your own? Did you have that awareness? Did your mom help you with that, or did you see that more in reflection?
I think it's a little bit of both. So I definitely didn't have it at 4, but as I started through high school, it was not. I mean, because it was known, it was not something we talked about it inside the family a little bit, but not as
Mm.
much as we should have,
Mm.
since my brother's death. But um, it was my mother taught me that, that each of us have gifts, and that those gifts, those traits, whatever you want to call them, can impact others. And so when she pushed me out to do different things, I started to see, you know, pieces of that, where I would do things where I was a candy striper at the hospital,
Mm.
or whether I was, working at the fair, the county fair, serving through the church, and things like that. And so, I kind of started to see that, but it wasn't because of the adversity. It was in spite of, I
Mm.
guess. So it was the adversity taught me that that could be an opportunity, because I looked at things and people differently. I saw them with different eyes because of my experiences. Excuse me. But then when I got to college, I think that's really when I started to see how the adversity could really propel me, and provide what I call stepping stones
Mm.
or catalyst to drive me forward rather than keep me in a box.
Mm.
Does
Yep.
that make sense?
It does. It does. I'm curious when so when you come through those teenage years and now you're getting ready to go off to school and you go to Ohio Northern. Ohio Northern is you said smaller. Is it a private school? Is it, and you mentioned,
It's a private university. It's a law school, engineering school, business, pharmacy, and arts and science.
and then is it a Christian university? You mentioned having a chaplain. Your mother talked to the
Yeah,
chaplain.
it was a Methodist university.
Okay.
So there was a chaplain on campus. At the time I went, initially we were required to go to chapel once a week. By the time I finished, that had stopped. But
The
it
requirement had
was the
stopped. Yeah.
yeah,
The 80s.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was
Right.
the 80s.
Right. And so was there a faith component for you in there that kind of girded any of your experience or?
It's interesting because my father's family had a very Christian or religious background. My grandfather had started a church in addition to being in construction, and my mother really, um, she believed that you found God in nature, that God was always there.
Mm.
But she always encouraged me to go to church. Like, she would take me if I wanted to go. She wouldn't go with me, but she would take me, or if people invited me. And I really didn't quite understand. I mean, I'd been to Bible school, vacation
Study.
Bible school,
Mm-hmm.
until I got to college. So at college, I really kind of found the more faith-based piece of it. I think it was there, but my mother just she didn't believe in the organization piece. She just believed that God was around, and her viewpoint was God is in nature, and she enjoyed nature
Right.
and still had a relationship with God on her own terms.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So kind of given that, were there other strategies or other things that you did, or were there things that you found yourself doing as sort of coping? A couple of questions come out for me. One around just sort of navigating through that challenge, and how if you found yourself either in low points or struggling or dealing with something, did you find this is how I deal with it? Is it through, you mentioned candy striping. So the thought came to me is around serving others. Like often what I find is if I'm feeling down or if I'm feeling like in a heavy moment, when I give or help others or serve others, that goes away almost immediately, and you immediately kind of get lifted up.
Yeah.
I'm curious if you had strategies or things you did through that experience that helped you.
Well, I did, much like my mother, I enjoy being in nature. I like being, out, enjoying lakes and the
Mm.
woods and forests, and doing that. And that's always given me peace or tranquility.
Yeah. God
And
is
it still
definitely in
does.
nature. There's no doubt about God being in nature.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it
Yeah.
still does. I mean, I grew up on a river. I love water. I enjoy being around water. It's to me very important. But um I think one of the coping mechanisms, which I talk a little bit about in the book, is what I learned is because people, even though I was visible, people still treated me differently. I was excluded in high school
Mm.
a lot. And, even when I tried out for plays, everybody kind of made the play because there's only, a few
Yeah.
people, but they typecast me as, the rebellious, girl in trouble and
Mm.
things like that. And so that exclusion,
Mm.
but what I learned through those processes is one, that you can put on a mask and you can present, people will take you at face value if you present that, right? But you can hide behind it. In the book, I refer to it more as a cloak of invisibility because I can hide in the cloak, but yet I can come out with the mask on and be. And what I found is by delivering results, whether it was serving others or whether it was presenting something, that was what mattered to people. And so I quickly found that I didn't have to reveal myself because most people didn't care about who I was. They just cared about what I was bringing them.
Mm.
And so in results. And so that's kind of how I did it. So it is kind of like that, like candy striping and serving a little bit. I did feel like I was, I wasn't showing my true self, but I was making a difference and impacting. Right. And that was an ability that I learned to kind of hide behind.
Mm. That doesn't sound healthy though.
It's not. It's not. It's something that I had to deal with later.
Yeah. Right.
And I learned, what in the book, one of the lines is, despite my mother's best efforts, I had found a cloak of invisibility.
I see. Yeah,
Hmm.
found it anyway. Right.
Hmm.
One of the other questions came up from what you said there, which was you're at a higher risk of suicide when you're in a family that's had a suicide, and
Hmm.
which I get, right? Because how I would take that just as a non-medical, like layperson's perspective would be, if I'm having depressive or suicidal kind of ideations or imaginations, and then you see somebody actually execute on it, it becomes more doable, more real, more as a possibility.
Yes,
Is that kind of
I I think so. Although I studied psychology for an undergraduate degree, I did not go take that beyond undergraduate.
yeah,
So I'm not the science
yeah,
side of that. But from what I experienced with my brother definitely felt and said that he felt that my father was guiding him at, at a couple
mm,
of points. And so I think it is kind of that sense is like, well, you know, this happened, and that's where, suicide happens, you know, it's one of those things when people get into that spiral and go into that. It's really important. That's where the check-ins are really important, and the conversations and the reaching out and connecting, because people lose their self-worth and they lose why they're important and why they matter.
yeah,
And yes, and I think if there's already one in the family or in a close community,
mm,
because you can have families in various different forms.
right,
um, I think it does create that, you know, thinking. But I will say, having said that, I will say that just because there is a suicide doesn't mean, or someone's had a suicide doesn't mean that it's um doesn't mean that it's going to happen. It just means
sure,
that, it's there. It's presenting
yeah,
presenting the idea of suicide to anyone doesn't mean that they're going to do it. Okay.
of
It has
course,
to do with where their brain is and where their mind is and how their emotions and feelings are working at that
right,
time.
right. Yes, I agree. Yeah, that makes sense to me. When you said about your kids even being in that same circle, like, my kids
Hmm.
are potentially at higher risk because
Hmm.
they're, a generation removed, but certainly part of the same family. That almost surprises me as well, that it would, I get it more, like intuitively, I more understand it around if a friend or someone that's like a peer were to do that, that you think, okay, maybe this is something for me, but, and maybe it's just that it just continues to dilute through the generations, right? Where it becomes less of an impact the further you go, further away from it. Is that
Yes.
fair? Yeah.
Well, and I think the more you talk about it, that's the
Mm,
point, the importance of talking about it and
yeah.
understanding that yes, it happened, I had another family member who, when the person got to their 30s, they struggled.
Yeah.
And, and basically his response was, I'm going to stop the cycle. And he went and got help and he talked about it and and we talk about it as family. We're very engaged around it. I talk about suicide prevention. My niece talks about it. It's, and we talk about the impact of it on our lives and how it impacted us. And I think that's also important to think about is when you have those conversations and how it impacted us, then people think about that.
Mm.
Whereas if you're not talking about it and it's kind of hidden like it was in my family, you know, then it can it it's not good. Like my
Yeah. It hasn't been
brother,
dealt with.
we really never talked about it. Um, excuse me, before my brother's death. And when my brother passed, one of the things he left a note, and one of the things he said was that, he thought his kids would be okay because I was okay.
Mm.
And, you know,
Yeah.
and that made me really mad for a
Yeah.
long time,
Yeah.
for a really long time. But because I wasn't okay.
Yeah.
But he didn't know that, right? Because we didn't talk about it. So we started talking about it. And so when the family member struggled with it, we talk, right?
Yeah.
And we say, okay, how, what's going on? And those are things that are important. But the other thing is there is a genetic component here.
Yes. Yeah.
And so there is a predisposition. I think, scientists are figuring that out. And I've seen a couple articles on that. And I definitely think that's the case in my family because not only did this happen in my immediate family with my father and my brother, but I had a couple of cousins who went through something in their 30s and 40s, and literally they say a couple of they survived, but they said it took their families the full support of the family to keep them alive during that period.
Mm.
Because they didn't want to. And I know like one cousin particularly, his wife literally stopped working because she wouldn't leave him alone for about 10 years because she couldn't.
Oh, wow.
And so there is a genetic component there. How much of that, again, the science is still working on it, but that is there. And so once you have an action on it, I think it becomes something that it's just you're just at higher risk.
Mm.
It's like, the way I think about it is, it's like heart disease and cancer. We
Sure.
all know what our risks are for heart disease and cancer if we have it in the family. This
Right.
is the same thing. This is
Yeah.
exactly the same thing, except your mental health is actually, you know, a big piece of your physical health, and it can
Yes.
actually impact all of your physical health. And so that's why it's so important.
Right. And vice versa, right? Your physical health can
Mhm.
impact your mental health as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hmm.
What
It's
you're
a whole
eating,
it's a whole health
how you're
approach.
sleeping.
Hmm.
Yeah, completely.
Right. Hmm.
For sure. Okay. Well, let's kind of move forward a little bit in the story then. So you go through get your degree, then you decide I'm going on to law school. And you had anybody in the family that had moved on to advanced degrees like the law or.
Nope.
Yeah. So,
Nope. My mother had talked about going to law school and she didn't do it because of my father's death. And so she really encouraged me to think about law school. And my mother would have been a litigator. Um,
your mother sounds like a very special person. She's Rosie the Riveter. She's going to law school. She's going to be a litigator. I mean, she's
let me
definitely
tell you,
seems like
she could do
you
pretty
think you
much
said original
anything. I mean,
badass. I get it.
she really, I mean, she's that, that generation was just,
Mm.
and there's been women in my life subsequent to that, but that one, she's special. She didn't go to law school because she felt she wouldn't needed to raise me, and there were some other things going on inside my family. So, around my custody after my father died, and so she made the decision um, not to go to law school, but she encouraged me. And so I thought about it. Well, I went to college and I met my husband, who was an Air Force candidate, ROTC.
Yep.
And I had decided that I was going to go on to law school. Didn't know what that meant yet. So literally, we got married right after college. think like 3 weeks after college, 2 or 3 weeks after college. And he didn't go on active duty for 6 months. And so I started law school. And I started at University of Dayton in Ohio. And then of course, the Air Force
Mm.
decided, yeah, you're not going there. You're going to go to Nebraska. So I
Yep.
ended up at Creighton. And but we didn't know what we didn't know about the military. Nobody else in the family had been, had like an officer
Mm.
career. So even in my husband's family, his dad had served in Korea in the Navy, but he wasn't. It was, a term, just like my dad's term. So there wasn't anybody in the family that had a military career.
Yeah.
And so we didn't know anything about that, and we just plunged right in. And I found out really quickly that military spouses are not supposed to work, and you're definitely not supposed to have a career, at least at that point in time. It was like I went back to the 60s
Yeah.
in the military world. Of course, there were women that did, but they weren't in the world that I was in.
Was that because they didn't want you to be like to complicate the need to move, or was it more like we just kind of want you to be invisible? I mean, why do you think that? What do you know why that was? Pardon the interruption, everyone. Do you ever feel like you're out of alignment with your true gifts, your passion, and your purpose for being on this earth? Do you feel like you're grinding it out each week with the appearance of success and still asking, is this it? If so, I get it. I've been right where you're at. And once I figured it out for myself, it's why I started coaching. Now I help my clients get back into alignment with their authentic self. I help them find meaning, purpose, joy, and energy in each day. Check out my website at ericsardina.com to learn more and to schedule a free 15-minute strategy session. And now, back to the show.
Actually, I think it was because of the base. So in the early time in the military, they really relied on military spouses to volunteer and do a lot of services on the base. And, in addition to, supporting the husbands and doing, military members, primarily husbands, and doing other events. And so they created that network, right? And that support. They were the support team, right? And that's truly what the military spouses were. And so, but what was happening at this time, all this was happening, is the military was starting a drawdown. Okay.
This in the 90s or?
This was in the late 80s. So it was just kind of, they were
Cold War.
it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so the military spouses were still, these were senior spouses that they'd been taught the way it was. And they were like, you cannot have a career. That's not, your job is to support your husband. And I was like, well, wait a minute. I too can have a career. It just has to go along with his.
Right.
And so again, I was basically the outcast. I didn't fit in. I was different. I was actually an intern on base at the legal office.
Oh, wow.
And so, so they just didn't, again, I didn't fit. And so, and because I didn't fit, I was an outcast. I was put on the edges. In many cases, I was invisible again. And the way I handled that was I just, they're like, okay, fine, you do you. I'll go over here and do me. And then when you have events, you show up and you're there and you're just doing what you're supposed to be doing, supporting your husband and not saying things, biting your tongue a lot. And being visible. It's the old adage of, the child's supposed to be seen and not heard. That's kind of how military spouses were at that point.
Yeah.
And so then, that's kind of how it went for a couple of years. And then we went to DC, and then we went to Germany. I kind of got back. DC, I worked as a lawyer, and then Germany, I went back into the military spouse world.
Yeah.
And, I had to kind of learn, I had to find a job and do things differently. But that's when you really saw the change. The spouses were struggling to figure out what was happening, because what was happening is the jobs that they had created and held on base were either going away, or they were changing into paid positions. And guess what? The military spouses didn't qualify,
Mm.
even though they created the jobs. And so that, that was difficult.
Mhm.
But in the 90s, there were a few more working military spouses around, or spouses who had degrees who may not be working. It was a little different, but it was changing.
Mm.
And and so it started to change. And because I had had the time in DC as an attorney, my viewpoint, I had kind of by then I was like, okay, I know kind of what I can do, where I could go. The time in Germany when we first got there was really hard because I had left the federal service because I had received bad advice about stepping out.
Mm.
And so I had resigned. And so that was really hard. But what I did is I just said, well, I need to do something. I got to figure it out. And it was it was the military spouse community at, that really kind of started in the 80s. I found a few spouses here and there who were supportive and very, and who taught me a lot. And that continued. And it was that military spouse community that began supporting and encouraging each other. And that was actually how I got the job in Germany. And the military spouse, I call it, from going from the frying pan of the Appalachian girl into the fire of the military spouse, because again, you have the capability to be invisible, and I didn't want to do that, and so I didn't, and so I carved a path, and it was not an easy path to carve, but it was best for me and my family. My husband was fully supportive, and because I especially with my history, I couldn't not work. I needed to be me, even when
Yeah.
we had kids. I love my kids. I love both of my boys, from the moon to the moon and back, but
Right.
it's better for me to be working.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
And and I did stay home with both of them for a little bit, but not very long. And but I was always available and supportive to them because my career just as my husband's did. So I carved that time out. But forging that path as a military spouse was hard. But then when I got to the position, when I went back to VA, and I found an opportunity to really, one, start figuring out who I was and climbing that ladder and defining me
Yeah.
and figuring out my leadership style. I also found out that I could impact and help military spouses along the way and help them have careers and bring them along, because that's the important piece. Is it's not what you do for you, it's what you can impact and do for others.
Right on. Okay, so at this point, so are you with then the Board of Veteran Appeals or in that organization?
Yep.
Okay, and so you're working your way up through that organization, and your focus is on helping military spouses find work, and are you
Right.
also?
So
Yep. Go ahead.
yeah, so I started at the board in 1990 when we went to DC,
Hmm.
and I worked there for 4 years, and then we went to Germany for about 3.5 years. And then when I came back, I worked for another federal agency for about a year. But I really missed the board. I missed the mission and the focus, because serving veterans really struck a chord with me. It made a difference, from my father to other people who had impacted my life.
Hmm.
And I really felt that that was where my purpose was. And I liked the work. I understood the work. Making a difference in a veteran and a family's life in benefits and services was really where I felt my calling was.
Yep. Yep. And so, okay, so you're leaning into that whole helping out, and is the focus around the spouses and the families? Is the work you're
Yes.
doing?
So no, the work was about veterans benefits and services. So
Okay.
veterans, what would happen with the board is, veterans would apply for disability ratings or for certain services, and if they were denied by the lower part of the agency, which was either Veterans Benefits Administration or Health Administration, then they could appeal to the Board of Veterans Appeals, where all the lawyers and judges sit for
Ah.
appeals purposes. And so that's our work, was reviewing those cases, looking at those previous decisions, and then deciding based on the evidence and the law what whether the veteran was entitled or not.
Right.
And so that was really important. But because for me as a beneficiary, because I had been a beneficiary, I understood that these benefits impacted the entire family.
Yep.
And so the focus wasn't necessarily on the family, it was on the veteran, but it impacted the family. But what I discovered in working at the board, because it was when I was there in the 90s, and then when I came back, the board was growing and they were hiring attorneys. And um, there were a lot of military spouse
Mm.
attorneys. And I found some and I was able to support their careers because, they naturally, again, understood veterans benefits because they lived the military lifestyle. And so they were really good. And so I started recruiting and supporting as I worked my way up the leadership ladder. And then I discovered in the early 2010, 15 time frame, somewhere around there, that there were a couple of organizations out there supporting it. And so at that point, we kind of created a pipeline.
Yeah, yeah. What's interesting about one of the things you said there for me was I know from experience and some of my veteran friends, the mindset of a military member is you're going to get hurt along the way. There's going to be stuff that goes on. And if you make people aware of it, it's not a great thing because it takes you out of the pipeline or takes you out of potential future training and investment by the military into additional skill sets because we don't want to invest in somebody that's damaged that may be bouncing out. So they tend to just not talk about it. Right. And they bury all of it and they just kind of, just carry on, complete the mission, keep going. I'm not really that banged up. And the whole mindset of being tough or getting through different programs is you're going to be dinged up. Don't complain, just keep going. And that gets baked in. And then when the thought is to start applying for benefits coming out, I haven't done any of the process that would lead to me winning something that would say I deserve benefits, but I'm clearly physically, have been impacted through this very difficult career. And now qualifying becomes a challenge. And half the time they're not even asking. And it's a nightmare, right? To get benefits for these guys that truly,
Yes.
and ladies that truly deserve these benefits.
Right. And so, one of the things when we were in Germany, because I had worked at the board at that time for 4 years, I started really like my own QP. And so here I was pregnant in Landstuhl Regional Hospital, which was like the primary pass through for people coming back,
Mm.
injured soldiers coming back. And literally I was there, because I had a complicated pregnancy, and I would go over to the ward and I would talk to these kids and say, look, make sure you keep records of this, document this. I would I would talk to their family members. I would really push it because I understood the importance of just that.
Mm.
And that was the other thing I did and that's why hiring military spouses and veterans into the organization that I ran was so important because they understood that.
Yeah.
They saw those things. And so when I was back at VA, I was pretty well known in my community that, while I couldn't directly advise, I would tell you, keep your records, keep copies of your records, make your applications, go find a veteran service organization to
Right.
support you. And then when as I stepped into leadership roles, I became much more vocal and I regularly spoke about that. And I still do, because I think it's so important for veterans to understand that one, those records are important, but two, the family members know stuff.
Yeah.
And that's one of the secrets people don't understand is, letters from family members and buddies can be a huge
Mm.
part of the application process and the claim process that can help you win.
Yeah. 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 And it's amazing to me. I guess it's not that surprising knowing that we're talking about the government, you're talking about a bureaucracy and it's massive but
Yes.
it's amazing and disappointing that it's such a maze to figure out how to navigate. And it's like you're saying, having the right guide, the right helper can make the difference between I get benefits or I don't, or I get reasonably good benefits or I get crummy benefits. And did I follow the right secret pathway and go through the right secret door that gets me to the promised area that it's like, man, it shouldn't be that hard. Right. But it is. It just seems like story after story is.
And that was something I took on as chairman. As the first military spouse and first woman, I really believed that those things shouldn't be a secret and we should talk about them and we should help people, veterans and their family members, understand that. So I spoke about that all the time and I still speak about that because it's so important. It should not be a secret. Shouldn't be this hard.
Right.
Right. And yes, the bureaucracy is a pain. I mean, trust me, I know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but it shouldn't be this hard, and it shouldn't be a secret. And you should be able to say, okay, I need this, 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 and this, and then I put it all in a box and I in a paper and I wrap it up, and here we
Yeah.
go,
Yeah.
right? And that's really what it should work. But you do need those helpers to come alongside you
Yeah.
to do that, because it can be daunting. I mean, we've had several friends who've gotten out who've called me and said, will you take a look at my service records? And I said, yeah, sure. And after I've retired, I didn't do it when I was working. And I'll look and I'll say, look, there's like 10 things,
Yeah.
okay, at least. And I'll say, but you really need to go get somebody. A veteran service organization will do this for you, and they can help you. You want to focus on these 5 things, but there's these other 5 things. And
Yeah.
and that's where people don't think about it. Or veterans, I can't tell you how many conversations I had in my front yard and in back of Ubers, and I still have, with people who say, oh, but other veterans need it more than I do. No, the VA is there for everybody. It's not just for certain people. Everybody who served earned benefits if they were impacted by their service.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
Period. And there's education benefits, and there's loan benefits, and there's service benefits. I mean, just going to the VA for treatment is a big deal. And it's one of the top medical, usually VA is one of the top medical facilities. So that was a lot of the things I talked about in Chairman, because I thought it was something we needed to get out there. And I really became the spokesman for it, and tried to get that information out to our veterans and their families. But the other way I did that is by bringing in people who understood that. So you have people who reflect those we serve, look like them, have the same perspectives,
Yes.
understand that diversity, that understanding,
Yep.
working in the organization. So when the claims and appeals come in, you can understand them.
Yeah. And I would think too, they know the questions to ask. They know the thing that the person that they're helping maybe isn't saying, and they can ask the right questions to pull out information because they've experienced it. Right.
Correct.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Very cool. All right. So let's talk a bit about leadership, because I know that's part of your story as well, is leadership and invisible leadership, and sort of, this unique approach that you take that I would think has been informed a lot by your mom. So this whole idea of like fierce leadership and yet relational, and having like a caring component as well. Talk a bit about that.
Yeah. So, I don't have an MBA. I have a JD.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's good, actually,
Yeah.
because I wasn't taught traditional leadership ways. Right. I learned how to be a leader from life and from a lot of reading and doing and experiencing it. And so what I knew going into leadership, as I stepped into various leadership roles as a baby leader all the way up to CEO, is that you can tell people what to do, and that may or may not work. Okay. And they might do something, but it might not be right. Um, but when you connect with people and you relate with people, just like, if you understand the person's having a bad day, or life is, a person when they walk in the door of the office, whether it's virtual or in person, does not leave life at the door.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Doesn't happen. As much as the business world and corporate world would like that to happen, it's not reality. We are human beings. We bring ourselves to work. And so as the leader, you have to understand that. So if you want your people, your employees who are people, to do something or feel a certain way or be engaged about something, then you need to understand where they're coming from. Now, does that mean that as a leader, you go out and have beers and go to a movie? No. But, do you know something about them? Do you know something about your employees? And that's because you have to care about them. If you're invisible, this is what leaders don't understand. If you're invisible, if you're not seen and you're not out and about, or you're only seen at certain times, have a whole entourage around you and nobody can get to you, or you're there and then you're gone,
Yeah.
you're still invisible. You create invisibility, then your cloak expands to your employees, and it can expand to your organization, because they don't think you understand them and care about them, because you don't know them and you're not sharing yourself. So how can you ask people, or ask people or expect people to do things when they don't know anything about you and you don't know anything about them. Like, what keeps them up at night? What do they like to do? What's going on in their lives? Not specific, but general. So
Yeah.
I started as the CEO, I started walking around and engaging with people. And it like threw people. Like, what are you doing down here? What's happening?
Yeah.
What are you doing on the floor? What are you, when we did virtual, what are you checking in with me for? Did I do, cause them, which is
Right.
not a good sign for the organization, right?
Yeah.
You want the leader, you want people to understand and be engaged with their leadership. And so, yes, I learned that from my mom because, you know, what she taught me was, one, if you're invisible, then people don't know anything about you and can't help you, and you can't help them, right?
Yeah.
Because you're hiding. Okay. And so I brought that, and then I brought that forward. I learned even more as a military spouse about vulnerability and sharing, and so many lessons there.
Yeah.
um, and so I brought that into leadership positions. And so when I stepped into leadership roles from the very beginning, I did it differently. And because I put the people over the results. Results are great, but they're fleeting
Mm.
because if you can't if you can't engage your people, and then the results are going to be fluctuating. And I saw that happen at the board over 20 some years. I mean, I saw different leaders, our results went up and down, but it was correlated with morale and trust
Mm.
and retention and all those things. And so I always focused on the employees as people, because first and foremost, they're people. And that, I think the pandemic really opened that up a lot more, that people, one, saw everybody else as people through the virtual world until we slammed that door shut and said, keep your family members and your furry friends off camera and all that stuff. But the other side of that
Mm.
is it started making people realize there's more to life than work. Work is just a piece.
Yeah.
Life is this whole thing. And the workforce, some people blame Generation Z and
Yeah.
millennials, and yeah, okay, fine. I mean, they definitely have a different voice and a different approach to it, but employees, I mean, I let them all, from boomers to Gen Zs.
Yeah.
They still all want to know that they matter, that you care about them, and that they have an impact. It's about purpose, impact, and value for every person, because that's who we are as human beings. And as a leader, you need to understand that, because if you aren't doing that and they aren't seeing that you do that, then it's you know it's not going to work.
Yeah. Yep. So that relational piece, and so you would compare that to conventional leadership being, I'm this sort of untouchable, unquestionable. I give the directive. I tell you what to do. You do it or else. That's more
Yep.
the conventional, as opposed to
Yeah, the
relational
convention.
is more. We know each
Yeah,
other. We
we
understand
know
them.
each other,
Yeah.
right? I mean, like, recently I went back to the organization, to the board,
Yeah.
for a portrait unveiling, because when you're a leader they do a portrait thing. And so I went back for my portrait unveiling, and when I walked into the room of primarily judges, which is about 130 of them now and a few employees, I could tell you in that room who liked to travel, who ran marathons, who had kids, who did different things. And I hadn't seen him for almost a year, for all, it was like 6 months,
Yeah.
right? But I knew who they were.
Yeah.
And some of them were new that I had hired before I left, that I'd recommended for a selection before I left, and they hadn't gotten through. So I didn't know them as employees, but I knew them from their interview process because I was engaged in all of that.
Yeah.
And, I think that's important, is when you have, I mean, I have people now, the first question most of them asked me was, what are you doing in retirement and how are the kids?
Yeah.
Because they knew I
They knew
had
you.
kids, right?
Right.
And they
Yeah.
they knew, like, did you move to North Carolina? Yes, I moved. Yeah. But they
Yeah.
asked me those questions because they had that base of understanding about me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that a lot of people I see, clients as well as just people in general, seem to reach a certain age and begin to struggle with purpose and impact and why am I here and what's this all about? Or maybe I've been grinding away at something that I thought was meaningful for a lot of years. And for men, from my perspective, having a lot of male clients, for men, they ground away at work, and then they kind of reach this point where they go, "Man, is this worth it? Is the effort I'm putting into it and what I'm sacrificing worth what I'm doing it for?" Because they've sort of lost this idea of purpose or mission. Talk
And
a bit
see,
about. Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, that's the difference. Is the Gen Zs and millennials, they're already there. That's what drives them. That is the difference with them. I think it's there with all of us, but that particular group, those particular groups, they are about making impact, having a purpose, bringing value, and they will walk past the benefits and perks to do that. And so they kind of discovered that piece early. And I can't tell you the number of people I've met who are, I mean, like me, most of us worked throughout our lives at my age, and then we retired, and then we do something different, right?
Yeah.
These kids, these people that I'm running into, they like work for a couple of years and go, yeah, I don't want to do that. I'm going to go over here and do something. And they completely redo their lives over here.
Yes.
And it's amazing. I think it's fantastic. Their leadership skills and abilities are going to be amazing. Their biggest fear is mistakes and failure.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And it's refreshing. It's refreshing and it's enlightening, I think, to hear your perspective on that, because what I hear a lot in the business world is people can't figure out Gen Z and the millennials, right? They're like, they don't care. They don't want to work. There's no drive. There's no, and then I have talked to several that have said you're missing it. That their number one, their ability to kind of navigate and work with technology, figure things out, problem solve is really exponentially high. And I like what you said about that purpose piece of they need to understand maybe the larger purpose, like why are we doing this? What's the value that we're bringing? It's interesting.
And that's why the relational leadership is so important, because especially for these generations, and I think it was there before, it was just, there was more acceptance because the environment created it, right? This is what you do. This is how you do it. The boss says, go jump through the hoop. You jump through the hoop, right? Where, I think starting probably with the next gens, I think the generation after me started pushing on that a little bit. But these guys, this group, these two groups particularly, just, they want to know, they want to understand, they want to know how they fit, they want to know what they can do. And part of the people will say, well, they want to climb the ladder really fast. Well, they do, but that's because they're taking in all this information and they see things and they don't feel like you're listening to them, right? And so it may not be a situation that they want to climb the ladder, but they do want to impact. And if they think you're not letting them impact, they're going to walk away.
Very interesting. So
I interrupted you.
No, you're good. No, you're good. Talk a bit about, because you mentioned retirement a couple of times. So you're retired, and I would imagine not just like sitting around. So I know you've got a book that's coming out, and talk a bit about your current purpose and the things that you're focusing on and mission and that type of thing.
Yeah, so I'm at the tail end of the boomer group,
Yep.
but I don't think or act like a boomer, at least so I've been told. But when I retired from the federal government job that I had. I didn't retire to go. I love to play golf when I have time, but I didn't retire from doing things because that's not who I am. When I was chairman, like I talked about, I did have a platform of military spouse engagement and employment, veterans transition, suicide awareness, as well as being the chairman and talking about appeals. And I believe in leadership, you have to do that. And so that platform was really built around purpose, impact, and value. So when I retired, and I was thinking about what I want to do, because everybody's asking, what am I going to do? I'm like, I don't know. I'm going to figure it out. As I knew I wanted to kind of bring that platform with me and continue that, but I didn't know what it looked like. So a couple of people reached out and said, do you think about consulting? I said, yeah, I can do that. They said, and then I had a whole bunch of people reach out and say, you need to write a book, including a couple of podcast friends. And I said, don't know anything about writing a book. Never saw that in my journey. I'm a lawyer, not a, and they're like, no,
Uh-huh.
because what you went through and what you experienced and what you did, especially at the VA with the government agency, turning that organization around to producing, you know, doubling numbers and increasing morale and support and bringing in the technology during a pandemic,
Right.
that was significant. And so you need to write about what you did. And so I said, okay, okay, let's jump in. And so that's what I did. So I've been writing the book. The book is, like you said, Dare to Relate, Leading with a Fierce Heart. And it really talks about first initially my challenges and figuring out who I was and looking at adversity and obstacles as stepping stones or as catalysts for opportunities to develop yourself and grow, and using those just like every mistake. Everybody knows mistakes and failures come, and that's how we handle them and manage them is what makes the difference. And so it's part of learning and growing, and any good leader will have made a million mistakes before their first success, and that's
Mm.
normal. So I wanted to talk about that, and it really became not the book I wanted to write, but a book I had to write, especially as I talked a lot with different people from a variety of communities, from the Gen Zs and millennials, of which I have one of each, and then but other people in their community, as well as just chatting with people, is this understanding, like you said, that leadership doesn't get it,
Mm.
right? They're not leaders aren't getting it. And it's a situation because they're hiding themselves or thinking that this is the traditional, or they've been taught, just like those military spouses were many, many years ago, this is the way you do things. And that's not going to work for this generation. But the other thing is this generation has so many, these generations, I mean, just their ability to take in information, process it really quickly. It's just amazing. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I wanted to do. So the book is almost done. So I will be launching my speaking from the book. I do a little bit of speaking now, but I will be launching my keynote speaking and other speaking from the book um, uh, once the book, or as the book is coming out. And I still do consulting. I do consulting on leadership, relational leadership, invisible leadership,
Yeah.
things like that, as well as I do a lot of consulting around government, understanding VA and how that animal is and
Yes.
works, and that bureaucracy flows. It's really interesting that, the VA is a very large entity, but excuse me, it's made up of a bunch of small entities. And from where I sat at the board, we saw across the VA because of our work, and so I saw a lot of stuff from a lot of different areas, and so a lot of people hire me to advise and consult them on things around that. So that's kind of what I'm doing, and occasionally sneaking in a golf game here or there.
Man, there seems like there's so many things that you could add expertise to and add value to. When you think about just the diversity of your background, you could help people, on the suicide awareness piece and mental
Mhm.
health piece. You could certainly the leadership components, managing complex organizations with multiple generations in it. That's a very complex thing. And I think right now we're dealing with, I was reading this, it's been actually a number of years, that there are, how many generations are actually working together in the same workforce is fairly unique, because there was, when the boomer generation was so large, there was a time when
Mhm.
you were boomers working among boomers, and then you had Gen X, I think, and then, but yeah, I think you
Yeah.
held up four there. So it's like four
There's
generations
at
all
least
figuring
four,
out.
maybe five, depending on how many boomers are still around. Because, I mean, the tail end of the boomers are 59, 60.
Right.
And so they're not done working in many cases. And some of them have re-entered the workforce and are doing, whether they do advising or whether they do other things. And so you do have that whole breadth and understanding all those generations, but it's not just understanding the generations, it's helping them understand each other,
Yes.
because interpersonal skills are probably one of the most challenging areas you have, because you
Completely.
know Gen Z's and millennials have a different focus. Millennials are a little different. They're the Gen Z's in particular. I mean, the memes, I see the memes occasionally, I'm like, yeah, that nailed it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, but that doesn't mean just because they might not be there doesn't mean they're not there, right?
Right.
But understanding that but then you have the boomer who's like, well, let me assess this, go through this, and I interact with you by relating to you and watching all your body language. Well, that's a little hard in a virtual world. Like you only see
Right.
from here up with the hands,
Right.
right? And
Yes.
so it's different, and you can mask it for a little bit, right? Or you can, meetings where people don't turn on their cameras. The control now is,
Mm.
you know, you can't see people, you can't know how your relation or your remarks are coming across. And so there's a lot there. Suicide's a big one. I do have work on suicide prevention on a government contract. So working a little bit on that. That's close to my heart. And then I'm still because where I live, I'm not far from Fort Liberty,
Yes.
and so I do a lot of work, support and advise, speaking really around veterans transition as well as military spouse engagement.
Yeah. Fantastic. Yeah. I would think that your biggest challenge will be taking downtime for yourself, for your own rest, recovery, mental health, all those things, because there is plenty for you to dig into, I would say, Cheri, no question.
Yeah, that's a learning process for anybody in any portion of their life, is figuring that out.
Yes.
And whether you're a CEO or you're retired and writing a book, you have
Right.
to take the time for yourself, and that's something that's extremely important for people to do.
Yes, especially I would think, coming out of a government career where you worked for a very predictable employer, and now you're effectively kind of an entrepreneur doing your thing and figuring out how you're going to make it all snap together. That's a very different environment, right?
It is. I can't say that I miss the 50, 60-hour weeks.
Yeah.
But I can, when writing a book, have those still.
I was going to
So
say, I would imagine you're working plenty of hours, it sounds like, from all you got going on.
yeah, but it's, I think the difference is you have a little bit more control of that
Yeah.
than you did, where at 10 o'clock at night I can turn off the light and go to bed.
Yeah.
Sometimes at 10 o'clock at night in the government, I had to answer an email or respond to something from, the secretary
Yeah.
that the White House needed or something like that. And
Yeah.
so, it's a different pace. You have a little bit more of where you can set your own. And I really am blessed with having a 30-year government career as a military spouse, which is a unique animal to itself, especially given where I ended up. That I do have a little bit of a cushion.
Sure.
And so I'm doing what I want to do because it is about purpose, impact, and value. Like you said, where, okay, how do I continue that? How do I continue to make a difference in the world around me? Because that's one of the things I learned at an early age, is that's really part of the reason, if not the whole reason, we exist.
Right on. Love it. Where can people find you and connect with you and your work, Cheri?
Okay, so they can always follow me on LinkedIn. It's Cheri Mason. Um, and there might be a Cheryl in parentheses because people get confused about whether to call me Cheri or Cheryl. So it's Cheri Mason with a C. Always follow me.
Cheri, right? Cheri.
Cheri.
Yeah.
Yeah, Cheri. Mason, very easy, like Perry Mason, Cheri Mason, same
All
thing.
right.
For those boomers out there. And then I also have my own website, which it's a work in progress, but we're making it happen. It's Catalyst Leadership MGMT.com.
MGMT management. Got it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you don't spell out the word management.
Right.
So it's
MGM.
Catalyst Leadership MGMT.com. You can always follow me there, get updates about the book, about any speaking I'm doing. I will probably, I was on the podcast up there. The book is due out in spring of 2024. We're in the home stretch.
Home stretch.
Home stretch. Yeah.
Fantastic. Awesome. Yeah. Great stuff. We'll get all those links put in the show notes so people can connect with you, and we'll encourage them to do that as well. And man, it's been a great conversation, Cheri. So enjoyed it. So appreciate you sharing all the knowledge that you did with the listener. It's fantastic.
Thank you. And I really appreciate you having me on the show. And I'm excited that you're coming up on your 100 your 100th
Getting close.
show. I can't wait. I'll be celebrating with you when you get there.
Fantastic.
So definitely, and congratulations on that, and Happy New Year. And again, I really appreciate the time to chat with you today and just, share everything around my world and hopefully make an impact to someone and make a difference in their lives.
Absolutely. I'm so confident that you will. And Happy New Year to you as well. To our audience, thank you for taking your time from your day to listen to the show. Always appreciate that you do that. If you would share the program with a friend, write a rating or write a review and give us a rating. All those good things help us reach a broader audience. Until next time, friends, I'm Eric Sardina. You've been listening to the Return to Authenticity podcast, and bye for now.